Sophie Carter gripped her phone, her hands trembling as she typed the desperate message. Michael, I hate to ask again, but I need $40 for Rose's formula. I get paid Friday. I swear, I'll pay you back. She hit send before she could change her mind, then slumped against her threadbare couch, exhaustion washing over her. The baby monitor crackled with the soft sounds of her 6-month-old daughter's breathing. Sophie had exactly $2.13 in her checking account, no formula, and had already watered down the last bottle more than she should have. The text was humiliating, but her pride meant nothing compared to her daughter's hunger. 3 miles away in the penthouse office of Meridian Technologies, Nathan Brooks's phone buzzed. The 42-year-old CEO glanced at the notification, expecting another update from his executive team about the pending merger. Instead, he found himself staring at a message clearly not meant for him. Nathan frowned, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. He rarely used this personal number. A select few even had it. This was obviously a wrong number. Yet something about the raw desperation in those few lines made him pause before dismissing it. Sophie's phone pinged with a response that made her heart stop. I think you have the wrong number. I'm not. Michael. Horror washed over her as she checked the number. She had mistyped the last digit of her brother's new phone number. I'm so sorry, she typed back quickly. Please ignore that wrong number. She tossed her phone aside, mortification burning through her. Exhaustion, another failure in a long string of them. Nathan couldn't explain why he didn't simply acknowledge her apology and move on. Perhaps it was the mention of a baby, or maybe it was just the welcome distraction from the cutthroat negotiations that had consumed his life for months. Is your baby going to be okay? He typed, surprising himself when Sophie saw the response. She blinked in confusion. Why would a stranger care? Her first instinct was caution. She'd heard plenty of stories about predators online, but exhaustion and desperation weakened her usual defenses. Well managed, she replied curtly. Sorry to bother you. I could help, came the immediate response. No strings attached. Sophie snorted. In her experience, there were always strings. Thanks, but I don't take money from strangers, she wrote back. Smart policy, Nathan replied. He hesitated, then added, I'm Nate now. I'm not a stranger. What formula does your baby need? Sophie stared at the message, torn between suspicion and a flicker of hope. Why would you help someone you don't know? In his office, Nathan looked out over the city skyline. Why, indeed, his assistant would say he was procrastinating on reviewing the merger documents. His ex-wife would say he was having another impulsive moment. Both would be partially right. Let's just say I've been fortunate. And I remember when I wasn't. He replied, it wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Sophie's exhaustion clouded her judgment. She hadn't slept more than 3 consecutive hours in days. The formula was on Famil Genelise. Rose had colic, and it was the only brand that didn't make her scream for hours. It was also the most expensive one on the shelf. I don't feel right about this, she typed. What's your Venmo? Nathan asked. Sophie hesitated, then sent her username. What did she have to lose? She could always block this person if things got weird. Seconds later, her phone buzzed with a notification. Sophie gasped. This Nate hadn't sent $40, he'd sent $400. This is too much, she typed frantically. I can't accept this. Consider it in advance for the next few months, Nathan replied. One less thing to worry about. Tears sprang to Sophie's eyes, blurring her vision. She hadn't cried when she'd been laid off from the accounting firm 2 months ago. She hadn't cried when Michael, her only remaining family, had moved across the country for work, leaving her without her safety net. She hadn't even cried when her landlord had slipped the late notice under her door yesterday. But this unexpected kindness from a complete stranger broke something loose inside her. Thank you, she typed, simply unable to find words adequate for her gratitude. You're welcome, Sophie, Nathan replied. Take care of Rose. It wasn't until hours later, as Sophie returned from the store with formula and groceries, that she realized something that made her blood run cold. She had never mentioned her daughter's name to this stranger. The next morning, Sophie woke to another message from the mysterious Nate. Hope you and Rose had a better night. I have a proposition for you. Sophie's guard immediately went up. Here it comes. She thought bitterly the strings. What kind of proposition? She asked wearily. Professional, not personal, came the swift reply. I run a company called Meridian Technologies. We need someone with accounting skills for a short-term project. Your brother Michael mentioned you were looking for work. Sophie nearly dropped her phone. How do you know my brother? How do you know I'm an accountant? Her heart raced as she checked her social media profiles, all set to private. Who was this person? I apologize for the intrusion, Nathan wrote after our conversation. I was curious. Your number is very similar to Michael Harris, who works in my HR department. When I mentioned a wrong number text to him this morning, he realized who you must be. He speaks very highly of your accounting skills. Sophie sank onto her couch, relief and weariness battling for dominance. It was a reasonable explanation, but still unsettling. So this was all just a coincidence, completely, Nathan confirmed, but perhaps a fortunate one for both of us. We genuinely need help with a project reconciling some accounts before a merger. It's a 3-month contract with the possibility of permanent placement. Would you be interested in interviewing? Sophie's mind raced. It seemed too perfect, too convenient. Yet her brother did indeed work in HR at some tech company. She'd never paid much attention to the details. She'd been sending out resumes for weeks. With no response, could she really afford to turn down this opportunity out of suspicion? I'd be interested in hearing more, she finally replied cautiously. But I need flexibility. I have Rose and childcare. We offer on-site childcare for employees, Nathan wrote back immediately, and flexible working hours. Come in tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll tell reception to expect you. As Sophie prepared Rose's morning bottle, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation wasn't adding up. The coincidence seemed too perfect, the timing too convenient. But with her savings depleted and rent due, did she really have the luxury of looking this gift horse in the mouth? What she didn't know was that across town Nathan Brooks was having second thoughts about his impulsive decision, wondering if he'd overstepped boundaries in a way that would come back to haunt them. Both the Meridian Technologies headquarters loomed above Sophie like a gleaming monolith of glass and steel. She adjusted Rose's carrier on her arm, straightened her only professional blazer, thrifted but still presentable, and pushed through the revolving doors. The security guard at the front desk smiled as she approached. Sophie Carter? He asked before she could speak. At her surprised nod, he continued, Mr. Brooks's office is on the top floor. Eleanor will meet you at the elevator. The smooth efficiency with which she was escorted through the building only heightened Sophie's sense of unreality. This wasn't how job interviews usually went, especially not for temporary accounting positions. An elegant woman in her 50s met her as promised and led her not to a conference room or HR office, but directly to a corner suite with views that made Sophie momentarily forget her anxiety. He'll be with you shortly, Eleanor said, gesturing to a sitting area. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water? Water would be nice. Thank you, Sophie replied, settling Rose's carrier on the soft leather couch. Beside her, the baby was mercifully asleep. Exhausted from the morning's preparations, Sophie used the moment alone to take in her surroundings. The office was surprisingly warm for a CEO's lair. Bookshelves lined one wall, and family photos dotted the desk. A guitar stood in one corner, incongruous against the backdrop of corporate success. She looks peaceful, came a deep voice from the doorway. Sophie turned to find a tall man watching her with keen interest. His expensive suit couldn't hide the athletic build beneath, and laugh lines around his eyes softened what might otherwise have been an intimidating presence. This, she realized with a jolt, was Nathan Brooks, the stranger who had sent her $400 for baby formula. Mr. Brooks, she said, standing quickly. Thank you for seeing me, Nate, please, he corrected, moving forward to shake her hand. His grip was firm but brief. And thank you for coming in on such short notice. There was an awkward pause, as they both seemed to acknowledge the strange circumstances that had brought them together. I should explain yesterday's texts, he said, finally taking a seat across from her. I don't make a habit of sending money to wrong numbers, and I don't make a habit of accepting it. Sophie counted, finding her voice. I'm still not entirely comfortable with how this all happened. Nate nodded, respecting her directness. Fair enough. The truth is your message came at a particular moment. Yesterday was the anniversary of my daughter's death. Sophie's breath caught. I'm so sorry, Amelia. Would have been 8. He continued, his eyes drifting to Rose. Leukemia. She fought for 3 years. Sophie instinctively reached for Rose's carrier, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. When I got your text about needing formula, Nate said, it felt like I don't know, a chance to help someone the way I couldn't help her. The explanation disarmed Sophie. The suspicion she'd been nursing that this was some elaborate setup, or worse, that he expected something inappropriate in return for his help, began to dissolve. And the job, she asked cautiously, completely legitimate. He assured her the connection with your brother was coincidental. But when I mentioned the wrong number story to the HR team this morning, Michael recognized the situation immediately. He's been worried about you. Sophie felt a flush of embarrassment. Michael doesn't know how bad things got. I didn't want him to worry when he's just getting established himself. Family pride, Nate noted with understanding. I know something about that too. Handed her a folder. These are the details of the position. 3 months, full benefits, competitive salary. We're preparing for a merger and need someone to reconcile some discrepancies in our financial records. Sophie scanned the documents, her accounting background immediately spotting the considerable salary, more than she'd made at her previous job. This is very generous for a temporary position. We pay for quality, Nate replied simply. Michael showed me your resume. 2 years at DO, top of your class at Georgetown. You're overqualified, if anything. Eleanor returned with water and coffee, providing Sophie a moment to collect her thoughts. The job was real. The salary would solve her immediate financial crisis. But something still nagged at her. Why didn't you just tell me who you were from the beginning? She asked after Eleanor left. In the text, Nate sipped his coffee, considering. Would you have believed me? Hi, I'm a saint. Let me help you. Probably not, Sophie admitted. And then there's the fact that this is rather unorthodox. He added, the board would have questions about me personally reaching out to a candidate. Rose stirred in her carrier, making small noises that Sophie recognized as the prelude to a full-blown hunger cry. With practiced movements, she lifted the baby and reached for the diaper bag. May I? Nate asked, gesturing to the door near his desk. There's a small kitchenette through there, more private. Sophie nodded gratefully and slipped into what turned out to be a well-appointed private break room. As she prepared Rose's bottle, her mind raced through her options. The job seemed legitimate. The company was reputable. She'd looked it up on her phone during the subway ride. And yet the circumstances remained strange enough to give her pause. When she returned, Nate was on the phone, his voice low and tense. I don't care what Donovan thinks. We're not selling that division because I gave my word to those employees. That's why. He caught sight of Sophie and quickly ended the call. Sorry about that. Merger negotiations are always tense. Sophie settled back on the couch with Rose in her arms. It sounds complicated business usually, is he replied, watching as she fed the baby. You're good with her. I had to be, Sophie said softly. Her father left when he found out I was pregnant. It's just been us. Nate's expression darkened momentarily. His loss, he said simply. The conversation shifted to the specifics of the job, hours, responsibilities, the project timeline. Sophie found herself relaxing as they discussed familiar accounting territory. This at least made sense to her. One last thing, Nate said as their meeting drew to a close. The on-site daycare is excellent, but it currently has a waiting list. Turn till a spot opens for Rose. Would you be comfortable working from my private office suite? There's a small conference room you could use, and Rose would be welcome. The offer took Sophie by surprise. That's unusually accommodating. I told you we need your skills, Nate replied, though something in his expression suggested there was more to it. And the work needs to be kept confidential, given the sensitive nature of the merger. As if on cue, Eleanor appeared at the door. Mr. Brooks, your 10:30 is waiting. Nate stood, extending his hand again. Sophie Carter, do we have a deal? Sophie hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Perfect. Eleanor will help you with the paperwork. You can start Monday. He paused at the door, and Sophie, the $400 was a gift, not an advance. No need to pay it back. Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving Sophie with the distinct impression that her life had just changed course in ways she couldn't yet imagine. What she didn't see was Nate stopping in the hallway, removing a photo from his wallet, a woman holding a baby girl, and staring at it with a complex mixture of emotions before tucking it away and straightening his shoulders to meet his next appointment. 3 weeks into her contract at Meridian Technologies, Sophie had settled into a routine that still felt surreal. Each morning, she and Rose would take the elevator to the top floor, where Eleanor would greet them with a warm smile and often a cup of coffee. For Sophie, the small conference room adjacent to Nate's office had been transformed into a functional workspace, complete with a portable crib for Rose's naps. The financial reconciliation project was challenging but engaging, exactly the kind of work Sophie had excelled at before Rose's birth had derailed her career plans. The discrepancies she'd been hired to investigate were subtle but significant, consistent patterns of small financial aberrations that individually meant little but collectively suggested something more troubling. These numbers don't add up, Sophie murmured to herself, comparing spreadsheets on her dual monitors. Rose babbled happily from her playmat on the floor, entertained by the colorful toys Eleanor had mysteriously produced on Sophie's second day. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. Nate stood at the door, his tie loosened, looking more tired than she'd seen him before. Making progress? He asked, entering and immediately crouching down to greet Rose, who squealed in delight at the attention. The baby had grown inexplicably attached to Nate, reaching for him whenever he appeared. Sophie replied, watching their interaction with a mixture of warmth and caution. But I found something concerning in the Thompson acquisition accounts. Nate's focus shifted immediately. Show me. Sophie pulled up the relevant files, explaining the pattern. She discovered these variances are too consistent to be accidental. Someone's been systematically siphoning small amounts from multiple accounts, then covering their tracks with adjusted entries. Nate's expression darkened as he studied the screen. How much are we talking about? About $3 million over the past 18 months, Sophie said quietly. You're sure it's why you hired me, isn't it? She counted to find exactly this kind of thing. A flicker of something, guilt, concern crossed Nate's face. Yes, of course. He straightened, running a hand through his hair. I need you to prepare a complete report. Don't share this with anyone else. Yet not even Michael, not even your CFO, Sophie asked, surprised. Nate's jaw tightened, especially not Greg. Not until we no more. After he left, Sophie sat back, troubled by the exchange. Why would the CEO want to keep potential embezzlement from his chief financial officer? Unless, no, she muttered to herself, don't go creating conspiracies. But the seed of doubt had been planted that evening after putting Rose to bed in their now considerably more comfortable apartment. Thanks to her Meridian salary, Sophie began her own investigation. By midnight, she had compiled a disturbing timeline. The financial discrepancies had begun shortly after Gregory Walsh had been appointed CFO following the unexpected resignation of his predecessor. The next morning, Sophie arrived earlier than usual, determined to speak with Nate before the day's meetings began. She found his office dark, which was unusual. He typically arrived before everyone else. A text notification lit up her phone. Emergency board meeting. Use the time to finish your report. We'll talk later. The vague message did nothing to ease Sophie's growing unease. She settled Rose in her play area and dove back into the financial records, expanding her search parameters. By lunchtime, her suspicions had solidified into certainty. Someone high up in Meridian was systematically embezzling funds, and the pattern suggested intimate knowledge of the company's financial oversight system. Sophie was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice Gregory Walsh until he was standing in her doorway, his imposing figure blocking the light. "Carter," he said smoothly, "hard at work, I see." Sophie instinctively minimized her screen. "Mr. Walsh, can I help you?" The CFO's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you've been working on some special project for Nate." Curious that he didn't involve the finance department. "Just some reconciliation for the merger," Sophie replied vaguely, her heart racing. "Nothing exciting." Gregory stepped further into the room, glancing at Rose, who watched him with solemn eyes. "Convenient arrangement you have here, private office, bringing your child to work. Nate must think very highly of your skills." The insinuation was clear and made Sophie's cheeks burn with indignation. "Mr. Brooks values efficiency," she said stiffly, "and I found several issues that needed addressing." "I'm sure you have," Gregory replied, his tone making it clear he believed something entirely different was going on. "Just remember, Ms. Carter, Meridian was doing fine before you arrived, and it will continue long after your temporary position ends." After he left, Sophie sat shaking, both angry and frightened. The confrontation confirmed her suspicions that Gregory saw her as a threat, but it also suggested something worse, that others in the company might perceive her special arrangement with Nate as something inappropriate. She was still processing the encounter when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Sophie Carter speaking," she answered professionally. "Miss Carter, this is Detective Lopez with the Financial Crimes Division." The woman's voice was brisk and official. "I understand you're currently employed at Meridian Technologies." Sophie's blood ran cold. "Yes, that's correct. We're investigating some irregularities in Meridian's accounts. I'd like to ask you a few questions." "I am not sure what I can tell you," Sophie stammered, looking anxiously toward Rose. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation at our office," the detective suggested, "this afternoon if possible." By the time Nate finally returned from his meeting at 3 o'clock, Sophie was nearly frantic. She immediately pulled him into his office, closing the door. "The police called me," she blurted out. "Financial Crimes Division, they want me to come in for questioning, and Gregory Walsh was here acting suspicious about what I'm working on." Nate's face paled. "Damn it," he muttered. "This is happening faster than I expected." He paced the length of his office, then turned to her with unexpected intensity. "Sophie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to trust me." "Trust you?" she echoed incredulously. "Nate, what's going on? Am I being set up for something?" "No," he said firmly. "The opposite. I need to show you something." He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick file. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about why I hired you." Sophie felt the floor shift beneath her. "What do you mean you weren't randomly assigned to me through a wrong number?" Nate said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been investigating internal theft at Meridian for months. We needed someone from outside the company, someone with no connections to the executive team. So you what targeted me." Sophie felt sick. "Your brother Michael mentioned you months ago, your skills, your situation. When we needed someone trustworthy, I remembered." Nate looked genuinely regretful. The wrong number text was genuine. That part was coincidence. But once I realized who you were, I saw an opportunity. "You manipulated me," Sophie whispered, thinking of Rose, of how vulnerable they had been. "You used my financial situation, my desperation, to give you a legitimate job that you're excellent at." Nate counted. "Yes, I had ulterior motives for hiring you, but not the kind you're thinking. I'm working with the FBI on this, Sophie. Gregory Walsh isn't just embezzling, he's laundering money through our international divisions." Sophie sank into a chair, her mind racing. "The detective who called is legitimate," Nate confirmed. "But you need to be careful what you tell her. We don't know who else might be involved." Before Sophie could respond, Eleanor burst into the office without knocking, something she'd never done before. "Nate," she said, her usual composure shattered. "They're here, board security. And the police, they're saying," she faltered, looking at Sophie with confusion. "Saying what?" Eleanor, Nate prompted, already moving towards Sophie. "And Rose, they're saying you've been embezzling funds. They have a warrant for your arrest. And they specifically mention Miss Carter." As an accomplice, Sophie clutched Rose to her chest, a cold wave of terror washing over her. This can't be happening. Nate's face hardened as he made a swift decision. Eleanor, use the private elevator, get Sophie and Rose out of the building now. Take them to the safe house. The safe house, Sophie repeated, feeling as though she'd stumbled into some bizarre thriller movie. Nate, I can't just Sophie. He interrupted, gripping her shoulders and looking directly into her eyes. Listen to me carefully. Gregory knows you found evidence against him. He's trying to frame us both. If you stay here, they'll separate you from Rose while you're being questioned. The thought of being separated from her daughter was enough to galvanize Sophie into action. She quickly gathered Rose's things while Eleanor collected the files from Sophie's desk. What about you? Sophie asked Nate as they moved toward a hidden door behind his bookcase. I'll handle this, he said grimly. I have allies on the board. Just stay safe until I contact you. He hesitated, then added more softly. I'm sorry for not being completely honest, but I swear everything else, the way I feel about you and Rose, that's been real. Before Sophie could process his words, Eleanor was guiding her through the hidden passage to a private elevator, leaving Nate to face the approaching storm alone. The safe house turned out to be a modest but comfortable apartment in a secure building across town. Sophie paced the living room, Rose finally asleep in the portable crib Eleanor had somehow procured, along with diapers, formula, and other essentials. You seem very prepared for this, Sophie observed, watching the older woman efficiently arrange supplies in the kitchen. Eleanor's normally pleasant expression was serious. Nate has always been careful. When the discrepancies first appeared 6 months ago, he knew something was wrong. So all of this was planned? Sophie asked, struggling to reconcile her feelings of betrayal with the evidence that Nate had been working to expose corruption, not perpetrate it, not all of it. Eleanor replied, her expression softening. Finding you was genuine coincidence, but Nate recognized an opportunity when he saw it's someone with the skills we needed, with no connections to Gregory's network. But why not just go to the authorities from the beginning? He did, Eleanor said, but Gregory has powerful friends. The first investigation was quietly closed due to lack of evidence. She handed Sophie a cup of tea. Nate needed irrefutable proof before moving forward again, which I found. Sophie realized what you found. Eleanor confirmed. Sophie sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. And now I'm hiding in a safe house like some character in a thriller, while Nate is possibly being arrested for crimes he didn't commit. Nate can take care of himself, Eleanor assured her, though worry lines creased her forehead. He's been preparing for this confrontation for months. Hours passed with no word. Sophie tried to distract herself by reviewing the files Eleanor had saved, looking for anything that might help Nate's case. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Are you safe? Yes, she typed back cautiously. Is this or it's me? Came the reply. Had to ditch my regular phone. Police took my devices, but released me for now. Gregory's playing this carefully, making it look like he's the one who discovered the embezzlement. What happens now? Sophie asked. Now, we use what you found. My contact at the FBI is meeting us tomorrow, 10 a.m. Sophie stared at the message. Us. If you're willing, you found the evidence. You can explain it better than anyone. Sophie glanced at Rose, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the chaos surrounding them. By agreeing to meet with the FBI, she'd be stepping directly into a dangerous situation, potentially making herself a target. The sensible thing would be to take Rose and disappear. She had enough money saved now to start fresh somewhere. But running would mean Gregory Walsh and his accomplices might escape justice. It would mean abandoning Nate after he'd put himself at risk trying to do the right thing despite his deception about how they met. Everything else, the job, the accommodations for Rose, the respect for her work, had been genuine. I'll be there, she replied the next morning after Eleanor arrived to watch Rose. Sophie met Nate at a nondescript office building downtown. He looked exhausted, but managed a relieved smile when he saw her. You came, he said simply. I almost didn't. Sophie admitted, "Part of me still thinks this is crazy." "It is crazy," Nate agreed, guiding her inside with a gentle hand at her back, "but it's also necessary." The FBI agent, a sharp-eyed woman named Morgan, listened intently as Sophie walked through her findings, explaining in detail how the embezzlement scheme worked and how it had been disguised. "This is exactly what we needed," Agent Morgan said. When Sophie finished clear evidence of both embezzlement and money laundering, she turned to Nate. "The board meeting scheduled for this afternoon, Gregory will be there." Nate nodded, along with the board members who've been protecting him. "They're planning to formally accuse me and vote me out." "Perfect," Morgan smiled thinly. "We'll be ready." The plan was straightforward but risky. Nate would attend the board meeting as expected. Sophie would wait with the FBI team in an adjacent room, ready to present her evidence once Gregory made his accusations. The timing would be crucial. They needed Gregory to explicitly lie to the board with federal agents present as they prepared to leave for Meridian Technologies. Nate pulled Sophie aside. "If this goes wrong," he said quietly, "Eleanor has instructions to get you and Rose out of the country. There's an account set up in your name with enough to start over." Sophie stared at him, stunned by the extent of his contingency planning. "It won't come to that," she said with more confidence than she felt, "just in case." Nate insisted, pressing a small envelope into her hand. "And Sophie, thank you for trusting me, even after everything." The board meeting began precisely at 3 o'clock. Sophie watched through a monitor in the next room as Gregory Walsh stood to address the gathered executives, his face a mask of regretful duty. "It pains me to present these findings," he began, distributing folders to each board member, "but the evidence is clear. Nathan Brooks, with the assistance of an outside accomplice named Sophie Carter, has been systematically diverting company funds to offshore accounts." Sophie felt sick hearing her name spoken with such calculated malice on screen. Nate remained impressively calm. "That's a serious accusation, Greg," he said evenly. "I assume you have proof." "The proof is in front of you," Gregory replied smoothly. "Financial records don't lie." "No, they don't," Nate agreed, "which is why I'd like to introduce some additional evidence." He nodded toward the door, the signal they'd arranged. Agent Morgan opened the door, and Sophie entered the boardroom with 2 FBI agents flanking her. The shock on Gregory's face was momentarily satisfying before it transformed into calculated composure. "Miss Carter," he said coldly, "how convenient. Here to defend your benefactor." "Actually," Sophie replied, "I'm here to explain how you've been stealing from Meridian for the past 18 months." For the next 30 minutes, Sophie walked the board through her findings, methodically dismantling Gregory's false narrative. While the FBI agents distributed her report, she explained how Gregory had created a sophisticated system of small diversions, hidden accounting adjustments, and falsified reconciliations to mask the theft of millions. The pattern begins precisely 3 weeks after Mr. Walsh became CFO, Sophie concluded, and the money trail leads directly to shell companies where he's the beneficial owner. Gregory's face had grown increasingly pale as she spoke. When she finished, he glanced toward the door, clearly calculating his chances of escape. "Don't," Agent Morgan warned, noting his gaze. "The building is secured." What happened next occurred so quickly that Sophie would later struggle to recall the sequence. Gregory lunged across the table toward her, something metallic flashing in his hand. Nate moved without hesitation, placing himself between them. There was a moment of chaotic struggle, shouts from the agents, and then Gregory was on the floor, restrained. "Nate," Sophie cried, seeing blood spreading across his shirt. "It's just a scratch," he assured her, though his grimace belied his words. "Though I might need a new shirt for the rest of this meeting." 3 hours later, after Gregory and 2 board members had been taken into custody after statements had been given and wounds treated, Sophie sat with Nate in his office. Eleanor had brought Rose, who was contentedly exploring a new stuffed elephant, while the adults processed the day's events. "So what happens now?" Sophie asked, watching Nate gingerly adjust the bandage on his arm. Professionally damage control. The company will survive this, though the merger might be delayed. He hesitated. Personally, that depends on you. On me. Nate met her gaze directly. Your contract has 2 months left, but I'd like to offer you a permanent position, head of internal audit, reporting directly to the board for independence. Sophie blinked in surprise. That's a significant promotion. You've more than earned it, Nate said sincerely. You saw what experienced executives missed or chose to ignore. Meridian needs someone with your integrity. Sophie looked at Rose, now falling asleep, clutching her elephant. And the accommodations for Rose. A spot has officially opened in the company daycare. Nate replied with a small smile. Though she's welcome in my office anytime. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Sophie, I know how this started. Wasn't ideal. I manipulated circumstances to get you here, and I'm sorry for that. But everything since getting to know you, watching you with Rose, seeing your brilliance in action, that's been the most real thing in my life since I lost Amelia. Sophie felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the day's adrenaline. I need time to think, she said honestly. This has been a lot. Of course, Nate agreed. Immediately. Take all the time you need. 6 months later, Meridian Technologies held its annual holiday party. Sophie, now established in her role as head of internal audit, watched with pride as her team received recognition for implementing new financial safeguards. Rose, now walking unsteadily, toddled between Sophie and Nate, who had long since moved beyond being just her boss. Ready for the announcement? Nate whispered, taking her hand. Sophie nodded, feeling the weight of the engagement ring still new on her finger. They had taken things slowly, building trust deliberately. After their unusual beginning, the board already knew about their relationship. Transparency had become Sophie's watchword in both her professional and personal life. As Nate called for attention and shared their news with the gathered employees, Sophie reflected on the text message that had started it all, a desperate plea sent to a wrong number that had somehow found exactly the right person. Though she still teased Nate about his knight in shining armor complex, she couldn't deny that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most perfect endings. Later that night, as she tucked Rose into bed in their new home, the three of them together at last, Sophie whispered a truth that still amazed her. Sometimes the mistakes we think will break us are actually pointing us toward where we're meant to be.